If you're casting platinum for your jewelry production, there are definitely certain alloys you want to avoid, and vice versa, alloys you would want to consider. Are you aware of the key attributes of a good casting alloy? Or are you wondering why, despite all the challenges and difficulties, why platinum ruthenium remains one of the most demanded alloys to use for our platinum jewelry? If you've been following us on Platinum ABC, you know we've done a few deep dives into technical paper reviews, and one name kept coming up again and again whenever we talked about alloys in casting: Professor Dr. Ulrich Klotz at the Munich University of Applied Sciences. So I'm genuinely thrilled to have Dr. Ulrich here with us. There are so many topics to cover, so today we are going to start with alloys, not just because it's a popular topic, though believe me, there's so many questions coming in from the trade. But because honestly, if you don't get the alloys right, you're never really going to solve your platinum casting challenges. Dr. Ulrich, thank you for making time for us. Really good to have you here.
Thank you very much, Ty, for the opportunity to have this conversation with you. It's a pleasure for me to join you here.
Thank you. So I'm just going to jump right into it. Let's start with a little bit more simple. We start with binary alloys. So my understanding is there are still trade that are looking at platinum copper, platinum ruthenium, platinum iridium. Well, some people use platinum palladium, but not as a binary. Platinum cobalt. So if we're just looking at binary alloys for platinum casting, what would you say are the alloys that really are not good for casting purposes?
Well, we have to group these alloys basically into two groups, one for casting and one which is made for so-called cast and wrought material. And typically for cast and wrought material would be platinum iridium or platinum ruthenium. These are the traditional alloys in watchmaking industry or for wedding bands, for items which are not cast. And on the other hand, for casting alloys, the traditional casting alloy is platinum cobalt because of its good fluidity, good form filling, and relatively low melting temperature. And platinum copper can be used, I would say, for both purposes, for casting or also for machined or stamped products.
Okay, so just to explain the difference between casting and wrought. When we're talking about casting, we're talking about melting the alloy, going straight into form, and then go straight to polish and finish. Whereas polish and wrought, we're talking about there's a level of cold processing or work involved with the actual metal, yeah?
Yeah, exactly. So casting means you're melting the alloy in your casting machine, you're pouring, and then you get the final cast product, a typical investment casting process. For the cast and wrought process, you do this if you make a watch band or a watch case, you cast a piece of metal and then you roll it into a sheet, and then you do stamping or punching operations to process your parts. Also, if you produce wedding bands, which have a simple cylindrical shape, you prepare a rod first, and then from this rod, you prepare the wedding band by machining. And so these are two different general groups of alloys we know.
I think for today, we can focus on the casting side. So just going back to casting, you mentioned platinum copper. What are some of the binary metals people really should avoid? Because I hear there are trades still using platinum iridium because they would argue, oh, Cartier used this years ago. But again, that's the problem. Cartier didn't cast it. They worked it. But you can't just go cast with this, right? What are some of the alloys that you do here that people still cast and really they should not be doing?
Yeah, well, the alloys, we can make two groups of alloys. Alloying elements that are reducing the very high melting temperature of platinum. This would be typically copper, cobalt, gallium, or gold. And then we have alloying elements that are increasing the very high melting temperature of platinum. And this is ruthenium or tungsten. And you can imagine you have a very high melting temperature of platinum, nearly 1800 degrees C. And now you're increasing this casting temperature, and this makes it even more difficult for casting.
Right. And if I can just also quote you from one of the papers you wrote, I think you also grouped metal by hardness. So or is it by hardness or is it by strength? I think hardness was one of the ways you group. Like there was the platinum ruthenium was like the medium hard. And I think that's just like everything underneath. That medium hard is not really appropriate for casting because it might just be too soft that they are susceptible to deformation when the consumer is wearing the jewelry. What's that level of categorization between hardness?
Well, the hardness is not so much an issue with the production technology, whether you use stamping or casting. The hardness is important when it comes to setting stones. A low hardness is very good for stone setting because it's easy to set stones. But on the other hand, if you bend the prongs and the material is not hard enough, the prongs can open again. And there has been recorded that stones have been lost. And so you have to find a compromise. And together with Teresa Freer from TechForm, we discussed that an optimum hardness could be around 130 Vickers. And well, in one of our publications, we said we think 120 to 140 Vickers we deem is an optimum hardness range. If the alloy is softer, then it's very good to work, but it might be difficult.
It doesn't
for
make
stone
very
setting.
good jewelry.
Yeah. And if it's too hard, on the other hand,
Okay.
it's very difficult to set stones. So if you have alloys with high gallium content, which reach 160, 180 Vickers, they're very reliable, higher scratch resistant, but difficult for stone setting.
Got it. So I realized I didn't ask a fair question at the beginning to say what's not a good alloy, what's a good alloy. I think as you were mentioning some of these, I think a better question to ask is what are some of the attributes of an alloy that would be ideal for casting? Maybe that's a better question to ask. One aspect you mentioned was melting temperature. So I think with casting, we definitely want the alloy to have a lower casting temperature, yes?
Yeah. Well, there is an alloy for every purpose. This is the reason why there are so many alloys around. But for a casting alloy, as we already discussed, the melting temperature is one key point because we're stressing all the materials a lot. We have a crucible, we have an investment material, and all these materials have to withstand this very high temperature of liquid platinum. And if we can lower the temperature, that's surely a benefit because that makes the process more easy, more reliable, and helps to work longer with the consumable materials. So the crucible holds longer, there's less risk for investment breakdown, and so on.
Right, because I do remember one of the videos where I was covering one of your papers, we're all talking about when we cast with an alloy, we also usually cast with superheat. That's putting a lot of temperature, putting a lot of stress on the whole system. And that higher temperature is definitely going to react with that crucible. And then other problems might happen, other defects might show up. So, okay, so one aspect to consider is casting temperature or the melting temperature of the alloy. So having a lower one would be ideal. What other properties are we looking for in a good casting alloy?
Well, one important point is the so-called melting range. A pure metal melts at a fixed temperature like platinum, but an alloy usually has temperature interval where it starts melting until it's becoming fully liquid. And during solidification, the process is vice versa. Solidification starts and takes a certain temperature interval. And this temperature interval between the so-called liquidus and solidus temperature. This should not be too high. Otherwise, we can get inhomogeneities in the local chemical composition, and the risk of shrinkage porosity also increases. And so, for instance, if we have elements like gallium or indium, they're reducing the solidus temperature a lot, and we get an increased melting range. And this can be risky.
So when you mention melting range and maybe certain elements is solidifying first, or is there a tendency that these elements will break that homogeneous?
Well, as soon as we form an alloy, we get a melting range. That's a physical principle. And with certain elements like gallium or indium, we get a very wide melting range, while with others, like with cobalt or ruthenium, we get a narrow melting range. And in general, this melting range should not be too large. It's difficult to give an absolute number for it. But because if it's too large, we get chemical inhomogeneity in the alloy, and we end up with shrinkage porosity. And therefore, elements like gallium and indium can improve the casting to a certain amount, but if we use too much, they can also be detrimental.
We briefly talked about hardness. Are there any other attributes that make a good casting alloy?
Well, at the end of the casting, you look for a very homogeneous behavior of the part. And one criterion is the so-called grain size. And grain size has to be relatively small and homogeneous in an ideal alloy, and ideally homogeneous throughout the part. So that's another point we have to look at.
That's very interesting. That's something that we not really thought about in detail. Since we're on the topic, can you explain the difference of a small grain size versus one of a large grain size?
Yeah. So in general, we always prefer a small grain size, and small means in the range of 100 microns. So that's beneficial because it gives the material homogeneous properties. If we have a large grain size and we deform a part, for instance, if we bend the prong, we get a rough surface after the deformation. We also call this orange peel, because it looks like an orange skin. It's a bit rough. And of course, this gives extra amount of work in polishing. And therefore, a small grain size is preferred because it makes less problem. And it's also making the alloy more ductile. So this means it has more potential for deformation.
So we've named quite a few different attributes we're looking for in a good casting alloy. So given this list, which ones are on the good side? Which ones are on the ones that we should definitely avoid?
Well, of course, in casting, the first and most important point is form filling, because if the form does not fill, we have not a good cast part. And from that viewpoint, platinum cobalt is definitely the favorite of all binary alloys. It has the highest form filling, and it casts very well, better than platinum copper, and much, much better compared to platinum ruthenium or platinum iridium. Especially if you want to cast filigree parts with small prongs or things like this, then platinum cobalt is the alloy with the highest form filling.
And platinum copper would somewhere between platinum cobalt and platinum ruthenium?
Yes,
in terms of casting purposes?
Somewhere between. it's better than platinum ruthenium, but less good than platinum cobalt. But platinum copper is actually not an, at least in Germany, it's more an alloy for the cast and wrought process than for casting. In Germany, we often use platinum copper instead of 95. Probably that's a traditional thing, but copper has the tendency of oxidation.
Okay. So there's oxidation, and I believe platinum copper comes in around Vickers 110. So from a gem setting point of view, it's also not quite there.
It's a relatively soft alloy.
It's an ideal alloy.
Something like 110.
Mm.
So from it's not the same hardness like platinum cobalt or platinum ruthenium, which are both around 130.
Okay. I think it's interesting we come to this conclusion that a good casting alloy would be something like platinum cobalt because of Formfilling, because it's very homogeneous. It runs into less porosity issues. It has a relatively lower melting temperature compared to other alloys like platinum ruthenium. Then we talk about platinum copper having some potential. Then we talked about platinum ruthenium being challenging for casting. And I think this is where it gets very interesting, because for the trade, at least where we are today with the jewelry trade, platinum cobalt is now regulated as an element that potentially causes skin allergy. So a few markets are now turning away from cobalt. For example, the UK market at one time was predominantly platinum cobalt. It's ferromagnetic, and they're like, it's fine. We can overlook that point. But now, because of skin allergy, every retailer are required to declare cobalt content. If it exceeds, I believe, it's 0.2% in the overall composition. And so retailers just want to prevent their brand and their name associated with anything related to allergies. So a lot of the retailers and the brands are turning away from cobalt. But that's one of the best alloys that we can cast with. So if we have to replace that, then what do we do? I think that's like number one, that's interesting. Number two, that's interesting, is platinum copper, because that's still a widely used alloy, I think, in Asia, because copper is just so affordable. Let's just use the word affordable. Platinum ruthenium and palladium, all those metal prices are super high. Not to say copper didn't go up in price, but still, relatively speaking, platinum copper still has a commercial and cost benefit. So a lot of the trade, it's looking to optimize platinum copper output. So they're like, can we put a third element in? Can we put a fourth element in? Would that help our platinum copper behave a little bit better to solve the oxidation issues and to increase the hardness and to decrease the porosity? So I get questions like this all the time. So that's like two really interesting points. And the final interesting point, it's platinum ruthenium, because the other set of questions I just mentioned before is a lot of people are asking, I get all these orders and they're all asking for platinum ru. And, you know, when I ask them why, they say that's just an industry standard now, because Tiffany & Co. does all platinum ruthenium and they do a fantastic job and the whole trade use it. But we do find it challenging. And we were just sharing that, yeah, it's not the most ideal casting alloy. So, yeah, I think we're looking at some discrepancies in terms of what we can use and what are the best ones to use. Where do you want to start? Do you want to talk about cobalt? What would be a good substitute? Do you want to talk about platinum copper and how we can optimize it, or do you want to talk about platinum ruthenium first?
Well, I think we could start with platinum ruthenium, because this is the alloy that was promoted a lot in the past.
Yes. Yeah. Even by PGI, we've promoted it quite a bit. Yes.
And well, there are clear benefits of this alloy. First of all, it has the right hardness range. It's consisting of platinum group metals, platinum and ruthenium.
Yes.
We have no issues with oxidation. And these are very clear benefits. Also, when it comes to
the color is also really great.
And the color is very great.
Yeah, the color and the whiteness is also good. Yeah.
Yeah. So it doesn't need rhodium plating. And you can reuse the material many times, because
Mm.
it's not oxidizing. It has no oxidizing elements like cobalt or copper. And therefore, this is a very good alloy to work with. But
Yes,
the
that is a
casting.
very important point. Is the reusability of the casted metal.
Yeah.
Right, the casting. I have a picture that I can share
Yeah.
screen and put it up. And it's from one of your papers. So if I might just share this.
Yeah,
I think this might tell the story, right? Why platinum ruthenium is a challenging casting alloy.
Yeah, well, this figure shows centrifugal and tilt casting experiment. In the upper row, we see the centrifugal casting, and the lower row, we see the tilt casting. And we have a comparison here of platinum cobalt on the right and platinum ruthenium on the left. And we cast this little grid. And with platinum cobalt, we have perfect form filling for both centrifugal and tilt casting. While if you look on, you see it on the right side. If you look on the left side, the two images, you see that the form filling of platinum ruthenium, on the other hand, is very low, especially in tilt casting. So platinum ruthenium definitely requires centrifugal casting because of its improved form filling capability. And this is these two alloys are the benchmark. And then in that paper where these figures are coming from, we were trying to improve the castability of platinum ruthenium by adding a small amount of cobalt. And we saw that this is very effective, especially in centrifugal casting. If we replace 1.5% of ruthenium by cobalt, we nearly get the perfect form filling. So it does not take much. This is, I think, a very interesting result. But now we run into the problem that cobalt is restricted, as you said, and that's 1.5 is definitely more than the 0.2%.
Yeah, I think it's around 0.15%. But it does solve the filling issue drastically, especially for centrifugal. So were there ever tests to put even less cobalt, say maybe like, I think right now it's at 1.5.
Yeah.
With cobalt, just maybe even 1 part cobalt, would that improve the platinum ruthenium?
We also did trials with 0.7 cobalt, and we had quite similar results. So we see that even a small amount of 0.7 cobalt was quite effective in improving the form filling. And in another paper, we have explained this from a material science point of view. But another point, I think you have another figure with
I do.
microstructures.
Yes, here we are.
And
this is the one.
This is also very interesting, I think. Again, we see 3 alloys. On the left, we see platinum ruthenium. On the right, we see platinum cobalt. And in the center, we see the alloy with 1.5 cobalt. And what we see on the left, we see these dark spots. This is the microporosity that everybody fears when casting platinum ruthenium.
Yeah.
Because when you polish the alloy, this porosity shows up, and it's
they're like a little web. Yeah, they're like a little web. It's almost like a surface roughness, but they're actually microporosities. Yes.
Yeah.
And they're the inside.
Yeah,
oftentimes they're not on the outside of the metal. They're on the inside.
Yeah, they're everywhere in the cast part. And this microporosity, of course, must be avoided, or it can be repaired by hot isostatic pressing. But of course, it would be better to avoid it from the beginning. And here we see that the small addition of cobalt also helped. It completely avoided this microporosity. And I think that's also a very interesting result of that work. And the grain size.
I think porosity, I think porosity, and especially in platinum ruthenium, I think we'll probably need another episode to come back to discuss this because, as you're mentioning, hot isostatic pressing, HIP for
Mhm.
short, it's something that we've been talking about too on our channel.
Mhm.
And we had a video, I think 3 years ago with Teresa Freya on HIP. And I think we should probably revisit the topic because we were talking about the effects, but it would be good to have some photos to show.
Mhm.
And then the other thing that could potentially help is just ideal melting temperature or pre-mixed alloys and pre-mixed metals. So I think we can probably cover porosity and how to deal with platinum ruthenium
Mhm.
porosity in another episode.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
yeah, sorry, just thinking ahead of
Mhm.
future
Yeah.
content that we can do. But coming back to grain size, yeah, we mentioned
Yeah.
grain size being one of the attributes that we evaluate whether an alloy is potential as a casting alloy.
Mhm. Yeah, and you see in the central image of these three, you see these areas with different gray shade. This is what we call grains, and you can read from the scale. This is in the range that I mentioned, around 100 microns, and this is a very good microstructure. And we have a similar microstructure with or grain size with platinum ruthenium, and this is clearly a benefit. Especially if you look to the right, here we see one homogeneous gray region. So the grain size of platinum cobalt is generally larger than that of platinum ruthenium. And therefore, a combination of these two alloys at that time we found could be very interesting.
Can you also just mention again what is the ideal grain size and then the benefit of having the small grain size?
Yeah, I think an ideal grain size would be something like 100 micron or below. And the benefit
And that's what
is,
we're seeing in the middle diagram.
yes, that's what we're seeing. It's in this range. And the benefit of a small grain size is that the deformation of the material is more homogeneous. We don't get this orange skin during bending. And also the material also can withstand larger deformation before it breaks. And it has a higher hardness as well.
Perfect. I think we have one more diagram after this one for platinum ruthenium. Let's just go to that and see what we have. This one, is there something we want to mention for this diagram?
Yeah, this diagram shows the surface of the cast part and the reaction with the investment material. And here we see that the surface of cast parts made from platinum ruthenium can sometimes be quite rough, because if there is an overheating of the investment, we get an investment breakdown, and this gives a poor surface quality.
Oh, wow.
So these are extreme examples, but it shows us that casting with platinum ruthenium requires greater care and very good investment materials. We found that there is a big difference in the investment materials, that how strong this reaction with the alloy will be.
So can I conclude that platinum ruthenium has a lot of great benefits and attributes? We mentioned that it has an ideal hardness, it has small grain size, it has a great color. In terms of malleability and also strength and hardness, it's all quite, I wouldn't say superior, but it's ideal for jewelry making. But it does come with a set of challenges when we're using it as a casting alloy. But it's not challenges that we can't overcome, right? There is a way to overcome these.
Yeah,
challenges.
definitely.
Maybe we'll just briefly talk about it, though it's going to be a different episode. Maybe
Yeah.
we really quickly mention some of the ways that we can solve this. So our listener is not like, oh my God, how do we say it's impossible? Let's quit. We don't want them to do that. We
not
want
at all.
We want them to work at it. Yeah.
Platinum ruthenium has many benefits, as you described, but it has some challenges in production, and it requires greater care by using the right materials, right crucibles, right investment materials, right casting machines. So it's not an easy to cast alloy, but it's manageable if you are willing to take care for the special points. And then in the end, it might still require hipping to get fully rid of this shrinkage porosity.
Microporosity. Yeah. I think we're definitely going to do a different episode called How to Get the Best Out of Your Platinum Ruthenium Casting Alloy. So then we can go into the details they have to watch out for, the care that they have to put in order to work with this alloy and to make it last. Everything also from cleaning and reusing the metal. We mentioned that actually platinum ruthenium is one of the better ones because it doesn't oxidize, but there is still an element of care that people need to put in. Yeah, that's fantastic. That's great. Okay, so I'm going to pencil down another episode for platinum ruthenium. Let's look at the other two, if I may ask about platinum copper, because platinum copper is affordable and also in terms of quality, it's still acceptable in some parts of the world. But a lot of producers and suppliers are constantly looking for ways to improve their platinum copper. So in the past, we've seen people put a bit of cobalt in there. We've seen people put a little bit of gallium in there. And we definitely see people putting palladium in there as well. If we do want to work with a platinum copper based alloy, what are some options or what are some of the ways that we can improve its performance? Maybe just from the perspective of adding other alloys, in your opinion.
Well, I think there are two issues. One issue we already mentioned is the relatively low hardness of platinum copper. That's relatively easy to solve by adding a third alloying element, especially if we use things like gallium or indium, we can increase the hardness of the platinum copper to the desired value. It could be up to 160 or 170 Vickers, but of course we can control it to be in the range of 130 Vickers. So that's one issue that can be solved. The other issue with platinum copper is the oxidation, and that's much more difficult to address because in many cases we're casting in air or under argon, and casting in air can definitely be a problem, and because copper is forming a black dross or black inclusions from copper oxide. And so here casting under argon can be better, but this might cause other problems. So as you see, there's a bit of compromise we have to take.
Right. There isn't really a way that we can solve the oxidation issue with the addition of other elements in the alloys, right? That's just intrinsically one of the attributes of copper.
Well, of course, one point would be to cast in vacuum or on pre-evacuated machine backfilled with argon. That's
right.
That's a solution. But if we do so, we decrease the stability of the investment material and the crucible. So that we have to take care to do that. That's, for instance, a point where platinum ruthenium makes no issues at all because we're just casting in air. Because there's no oxidation.
And I think a lot of this comes back in reusing old alloys like the buttons in the tree, even with extensive cleaning. Platinum copper with this oxidation problem does come back and present brittleness and other issues into the metal when we do reuse it.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think from the trade side, the consideration of solving the hardness issue could be one. With certain markets, I think they're comfortable with putting 80% new metal into the melt. I think from quality perspective, they can still get oxidation managed. So we're just looking from hardness, platinum, copper, the addition of gallium or even cobalt could give it a slightly higher hardness. What do you think about people going back to palladium? Because there are some manufacturers out in this part of the world that believed in the 80s, the Japanese were using palladium-based platinum alloys. But of course, sometimes the Japanese use PT900. Sometimes they even use platinum A50. And once upon a time, they did sell pre-mixed casting alloys with platinum palladium base. What do you think about people who are using platinum copper and putting palladium into the platinum copper mix? Does that help, or does that actually make things worse?
Well, it makes the issues with oxidation are becoming smaller because you have less copper. But in terms of hardness, it will not help. So we see that the platinum palladium alloys are actually the softest. We have values of 80, 90 Vickers. So they're really very soft. And I think it's accepted that they're not good for stone setting at all. It's good if you can do mechanical deformation like rolling or things like this, but this is not the case for cast alloys. So if you can roll a sheet or make a wire, then you can increase the hardness again. And then they're also suitable for stone setting, but not on a cast item where you don't have these possibilities to increase the hardness that way.
So the addition of palladium gives the impression for the caster that it's better to cast because it's definitely easier. It's much more homogeneous. It's going to be less porosity. But the finished product, platinum palladium with copper, even if we add cobalt into that mix, is not really going to make it a better jewelry metal because the hardness is just not there. So it's going to be more easy to deform. And so if we have stones in there, there's a higher chance that the stones will fall out because the hardness is much lower. Okay, got it. Yes, I think it's always kind of like a paradox. The casters are always looking for something easier to work with, but what tends to be an easier alloy, it's actually not as well of a metal for the end consumer. And what is great for an end consumer often takes a lot more work in the casting and the finishing process. So we haven't really found that perfect balance where it's like, oh, it's great to cast, it's great to work, it's great to polish, and it's great for customers. So there's always these two ends pulling. And I think one end is, for example, we talked about platinum ruthenium, it's exactly that. It's a great alloy. It's a great metal for the end consumer because of what it has to offer, but it could be challenging for the producers. Absolutely. So we did talk about, and the final one, which is platinum cobalt. And I think just to be very direct and maybe a little bit blunt about the question is, because cobalt is now regulated and a lot of people are looking to step away from cobalt, what would be a great alloy that behaves like platinum cobalt, that has all the attributes that we were checking off, that has good form filling, it has less porosity, it has a ideal sort of melting temperature, it's got a pretty decent, a small, relatively small grain size. So if we are not using platinum cobalt, if someone has to step away from it, what would be a good substitution?
Yeah, that's a very good question.
We can broaden it beyond binary, right?
Yeah,
Stuff, it's definitely not going to be a binary metal. And maybe we don't have an exact answer in the moment because I think the trade is also testing a lot of different ones. But what would be some of the areas that we can look at?
Yeah, that's a very good question.
Yeah.
That's kind of holy grail we want to find. But I think none of the alloys that are on the market now really fulfills this. So the form filling of platinum cobalt is not matched by any of the alloys as far as I know. This has to do with the special properties of cobalt which makes the fluidity and the form filling very good. Well,
Right.
I think it's definitely more than a binary alloy if we want to solve this point, if we want to get close to platinum cobalt. We have to take different measures to address the oxidation, look at the form filling, the fluidity, and the grain size. So I think it requires a series of testing, and I think modern simulation techniques could help us to correlate the behavior of the material in this complex casting process with the material properties. And this is a point that we should really use modern simulation techniques to solve, first to better understand what makes platinum cobalt so unique, and then to modify an alloy to get close to these properties.
Dr. Ulrich, if you can also mention again, what are some of the attributes of a great casting alloy?
Some of the attributes of a great casting alloy would be, first of all, the form filling, because that's the basic requirement that we have. Then a second requirement should be that the melting temperature of the alloy should not be too high to avoid excessive reaction with crucibles and investment materials. Then as a third point, I would say we need a certain melting range, which should not be too large. Otherwise, we get problems with segregation and shrinkage porosity. And finally, the alloy should not oxidize when casting in air. So we have to avoid elements which have a high tendency for oxidation.
And I think just to add on to that list, you also mentioned smaller grain size and
Yes.
also an ideal hardness to the alloy. I think those are some of the attributes we'll be looking for.
Yes, you're right to mention this. Well, the hardness, in our previous research, we found a hardness value of 130 Wickers as ideal, maybe up to 160 or even 180, depending a bit how much stone setting is involved in producing the part. And then finally, the grain size of the alloy should be homogeneous and relatively small to avoid surface roughness during stone setting when bending prongs, for instance.
And so we've heard about all the different attributes that makes a really great and ideal casting alloy. I think if I can try to sum it up, I think for matters of hardness, because a lot of the binary metals that we work with, they do not reach the ideal hardness of 130 to 160 Vickers, especially when it comes to gem set. And we mentioned the addition of gallium and indium could potentially solve that hardness issue. We talked about platinum cobalt. Because the nature of this alloy, it's really superior when it comes to form filling. And more work is probably required to research and develop an alloy to replace cobalt to reach its level of fluidity and filling. I think there's still some work to be done. We talked about platinum ruthenium, and I think the overall impression I'm getting from this conversation is there are different alloys with specific attributes that's good for different things, but there's always a solution. So there might not be a magical alloy at this moment that can solve all issues, but there are things in the process that we can do to help with the casting results. Even for a difficult alloy like platinum ruthenium, with the porosity, with the form filling, there are still things we can do. And we mentioned things like HIP and we mentioned premix alloys. We're going to dedicate an entire different episode to just talk about solutions for platinum ruthenium. Are there anything else that we're missing that could really help with casting when we're looking for a good alloy or things that we can do to address casting issues?
Yeah, we talked a lot about alloys, and that's surely a very important point, but we should not forget to consider the whole process, because casting is not just choosing the right alloy, it's also choosing the right casting machine, choosing the right casting parameters, the right materials for crucible and investment material. And then, of course, it's also very important to design your tree properly for casting, to mount the parts in the right way on the main sprue, to use right sprueing, to get the directional solidification that is required. So we have to consider the whole story. And alloys is one aspect, a very important one, and we can change many things, but these things are all connected. And therefore, we must not lose the big picture of the whole process.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And there's so many different topics to cover, and we're just starting to chip the tip of the iceberg with the discussion around alloy. We definitely look forward to speaking with you again, because you mentioned concepts like directional solidification and certain thermodynamics and simulations of how casting would work, including all the solutions we have for difficult alloys like platinum ruthenium. We definitely would hope you give us your time and we'll cover those topics in the future.
Yeah.
But for today, for alloys, thank you so much, Dr. Ulrich, for spending the time with us to go through some of the key attributes in a casting alloy.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the opportunity and for this very interesting talk.